Welcome to Unity Now, a podcast where we discuss all things Unity 2020. This is part 3 of a segment that we're calling the Candidate Debate, discussion centered around potential nominations for candidates on the Unity 2020 ticket. If you're landing on this podcast for the first time, then maybe you already know what Unity 2020 is. You want to learn more about it from the podcast, or you may want to know what is Unity 2020. And if you're one of those people, then I owe you at least a potted explanation. And so that's what I'll give you before we bring on our guests. But if you want something in more detail, then I refer you to the Unity 2020 website, which is articlesofunity.org. Unity 2020 is a movement that stems from an unprecedented proposal, namely that we, the people, draft 2 candidates, one from the center left, one from the center right, and once elected, they agreed to govern as a team. All decisions and appointments being made jointly in the interests of the American public. The candidates must satisfy 3 overarching criteria. They must be patriotic, they must be highly capable, and they must be courageous. Once elected, the 2 candidates agreed to govern as a team, and all decisions and appointments will be made jointly in the interest of the American public. Only when they can't reach an agreement or when a decision doesn't allow for consultation does the president decide independently. That's the Unity 2020 10,000-foot view. So again, to learn more about the movement, including a frequently asked questions page, go to articlesofunity.org. My guests today are members of the Unity 2020 management team, I guess we'll call it, and they're here to discuss their own thoughts about candidates who they believe may fulfill these criteria. And then we'll also get into some other relevant Unity 2020 information, like we recently had an interesting night with Twitter, where we got one of our movement's hashtags to trend, and no sooner was it trending than the powers that be at Twitter decided that we must all be Russian bots, and they shut down Articles of Unity Twitter handle, and then they blocked access to our website. So that may come up, and the movement's founder, Dr. Bret Weinstein, hosts conversations regularly that he calls Campfires, where he celebrates our movement's successes and discusses frustrations and invites people to help out blueprint the way forward. So I'll add that into a possible discussion point. And one last salient bit of information. Today's episode is being recorded on Sunday, August 30th. And so that's the same day that our voting process is happening, and thereby narrowing our final 6 candidates down to 2. So by the time you're watching or listening to the podcast, the voting process is over, and it's possible that the votes have been counted already, and therefore it's also possible that this conversation about the candidates themselves is a moot point in some ways. But at the very least, you can be certain that nothing about the conversation is meant to persuade you to vote for one person or another. And all the same, the conversation about candidates should be a worthwhile one, if for no other reason than to help people understand what it means to be a leader, no matter who they are, and to possess the characteristics that would be required to lead the country as per Unity 2020. And so now you'll know what we'll be talking about, and we'll get to all of those things. But to do that, I actually have to introduce today's guests, so let's hit it. Our guests today are, and I should have thought about the pronunciation, gentlemen, of your names, so I'm going to say them. And I've worked as a substitute teacher before, and this is my nightmare when I have the list of names to pronounce and do it wrong. I'm going to go for it. Richard Idris and Josiah Martins.
Perfect.
How'd I do? Okay, Richard, how'd I do? What is it?
It's people say Idris. The one that I like to use as an example, it's like Idris Elba.
Idris.
So Richard Idris.
Okay. Richard, Josiah, thank you for being with me, gentlemen.
Right on.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Let's start with a discussion about candidates. Richard is going to be talking to us about Jessie Ventura and why he believes Ventura properly hits the 3 Unity 2020 criteria. Josiah is going to talk about why Jocko Willink, another one of Unity's final 6 nominees, possesses these qualities. Okay, Josiah, maybe we'll begin with you. Will you just tell me and listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, what brought you to Unity 2020?
Sure. I'm out of Eugene, Oregon, and do a lot of different kinds of design and building projects. Like I'm been have a background in construction, and I worked as an industrial designer for several years, and I'm kind of COVID threw a wrench into everything. So I'm sort of figuring out what a career path forward is like right now, which I'm sure a lot of folks can relate to. And I first became sort of politically aware listening to Dan Carlin's Common Sense podcast back in, I think, 2005. That was the first political voice I heard that gave me some kind of hope and interest that there was something there that I that was actually accessible and like exciting. It was the first exciting political voice I heard. And this is really when I encountered Unity 2020 through the Dark Horse podcast. It was the first time since then that I've encountered a new movement, a new idea, a new kind of body of thought that similarly excited me. And it's really the first political movement I've wanted to become involved with without reservation. So I'm very, very keen on being a part, participating, throwing everything I've got at it, and really excited to be here.
Thank you. Well, perfectly fair, and I think that's a different flavor of a very, very common story that I've heard throughout asking participants different questions. And Richard, I should get to you. Same to you. Tell us about yourself and what brought you to Unity.
I got involved with Jessie Ventura and drafting him earlier this summer when he had indicated interest in running for the Green Party nomination, predominantly as a tool to get ballot access. And that was after. So in my personal life and my professional life, I'm a debate coach. I teach like high school and college students how to form arguments and do research, which leads me down a lot of different paths, exploring different political opinions. I'm on the younger side. I'm in my late 20s. I live in the Bay Area, but I grew up predominantly in northern Utah in the Salt Lake Valley area. So I've had my experience dealing with both sides of the political spectrum. Some folks would say both extremes of the political spectrum, depending on who you ask. And my kind of first moment getting involved with politics was when I was still in high school. I campaigned for Obama in 2008 because I was pretty disillusioned with politics, and he seemed to be promising some change. That quickly fizzled out, I think, for a lot of us. By 2012, I was pretty disengaged from politics. 2016 came around. Bernie Sanders kind of caught my eye, and I watched that primary process fall apart due to some undemocratic decision making. That led me to looking at third-party options. In 2016, I voted for Jill Stein, and in 2020, I've been sitting around. I wanted to vote for Bernie Sanders. I watched what happened in the primary process and how he kind of just kowtowed to the establishment. And I realized there's no point in engaging with either of the major parties anymore. At the end of the day, what ends up happening is money kind of controls the show. It's whoever can bring in the dollars, but not from ordinary people. It's from the big dollar donors, the folks who are what they call the movers and the shakers in the country. And kind of the working everyday person gets pushed to the side. And we now have two of the worst candidates in modern history and no viable alternative that people think of. So hearing about the Unity 2020 movement after watching the joke of a nomination process with both the Green Party and the Libertarians this summer was kind of a breath of fresh air that folks would have an opportunity to draft folks out of nowhere. There's a lot of people who agree that that's how politics should be. That's how the Greeks selected their candidates way back when. It was folks who were just nominated by popular support. And so I think the logic behind the movement is sound, and the idea that we could cut across polarization by bringing together folks from both sides in a productive fashion makes sense to me, because a lot of folks are, not only do we have wiggle room on our opinions, but a lot of us don't really disagree on major issues. Like we're on the verge of a civil war because people polarize over very arbitrary social issues. The media makes a mint out of it. And the people are left to suffer. We got a pandemic going on and no one's getting any help.
So we can see why you've leaned into the movement, why it's not only interesting but attractive to you. And like I was saying to Josiah, that's a common thread between most, if not all, participants. And since you have the juices flowing a little bit, it seems like you're boosterish about Jessie Ventura. You're familiar with him, obviously, since you've done some work around him and the idea of him campaigning for the Green Party. So tell me why you think that he's properly patriotic, capable, courageous.
Well, I think in a practical sense, Ventura is one of the only candidates out there who can say that they have a history of beating the duopoly, which I think really shouldn't be overstated, because the circumstances where Jessie entered the race were pretty much on parallel with what Unity's about to do.
You're talking about his governorship. Sorry.
Yeah. When he entered into the governor's campaign, there was about 90 days left. He polled at 8% originally. He did a little bit of campaigning, got into the debates, and got noticed and wound up winning within the 90-day period, just because he was able to speak to common sense, everyday ideas. Like one of the big moments in his debates was the moderators asked him what they thought was a gotcha question about a specific ironworkers union, like up in the mountains in Minnesota. And Jessie's response was, I don't know about that union, but I'd be willing to learn about it. And the audience went wild, because that was a politician admitting, you got me, but God forbid I admit that I'm not perfect. Like we're not electing gods. We're electing people that we think have good ideas. And so what's really spoken to me about him is his willingness to be ideologically flexible. He doesn't consider himself left or right. And in my experience campaigning for him, if we reach out to the left, we get told Jessie is too right. If we reach out to the right, we get told Jessie is too left. So I think that speaks to how the polar ends of the spectrum, that he doesn't pass their purity tests. And not a lot of people pass purity tests, because people's opinions are kind of all over the place. My mom is a Trump supporter, but she also thinks that universal health care is a good idea. There's a lot of folks who voted Trump who think the same thing. But she also thinks the word socialism is a dirty word, and won't vote for Bernie Sanders because she thinks he might usher in communism. So it's interesting to hear that dichotomy. But the truth is, a lot of people have that kind of an inconsistent worldview. And part of that is from propaganda. And part of that's just because people, look, we're not computers. You don't put in zeros and ones and out pops the same data. We're communicating beings. So it's nice to see a leader who's willing to meet that sort of moment. His cabinet picks were all across party lines. And that was one of the most positive things about his governorship. All of his court appointments were raved about because they were nonpartisan. So he has a pretty solid track record of being able to reach across the lines.
Fair enough. I want to plant a flag on that thread so that we can come back and rediscover it again and expand on it. I'll leave it up for Josiah. I know that from our previous conversations, you're not necessarily up for flying a Jocko 2020 banner around, or maybe you are, but you're saying he could be a quality candidate, maybe not. But the point is, maybe Moog at this stage. You've also told me briefly that you do think that Jocko Willink has qualities and ideas that could make him fit to lead, at least based on our Unity 2020 requirements. And I hope you'd elaborate if you could.
Yeah, sure. The feature of Unity 2020 that I'm most excited about has more to do with the platform in general, rather than any particular ticket. So I honestly think any combination of the 6 candidates we have would be, obviously leagues better than what else is on offer, but leagues better than anything we've had in recent memory. So the question really now comes down to electability, like how much support they will be able to generate from the disaffected center. And like, that's a question that I don't really know how to answer. Everybody has their own little, the communities that they touch and the perspectives that they're exposed to. And but then you talk to somebody from across the country, and they maybe everybody I've talked to in Unity 2020 sort of feels like to use the Dan Carlin phrase, a Martian. So there's a Martian political actor or political entity, because nobody, like none of the binary options character or represent them. But there's different within that sort of Martian nature. There's all sorts of different kind of focuses and emphases, and so I don't know who is going to be most electable. I think that's my most that's the live question that is right now. I haven't voted for the ticket I would like to see yet, but honestly, I'm going to make my best guess at who I think is electable, and no matter who ends up being on the Unity 2020 ticket, like I'm gonna like throw all my weight behind that. I mean, it's not a whole lot of clout, but it's as much as I got. So that's sort of a preamble. And I've been aware of Jocko for a number of years now. I think I first heard him on Tim Ferriss. But he's always, it's just formidably disciplined. That's always his unassailable, like his integrity seems unassailable. One of the critiques I've heard of him is that he is not, he's not been tested in public office. I don't even really know what his positions are. That could be a con or that could be a pro. He has demonstrated a capacity to talk with a huge like range of people and to talk meaningfully and productively with them. And I think as a figurehead of the country, he both represents this, or he would represent, just physically this aspect of like strength and like capacity to follow through with a plan, but also a sort of soft openness, or maybe not soft, but a flexible openness with respect to discourse. He's kind of the physical embodiment of the Teddy Roosevelt speak softly and carry a big stick. And that's my general sense of him. But I don't know how like the whole country would that. So any reservation I have about Jocko is, how that's going to look to, like the vast majority of the disaffected center that we're trying to reach. Maybe that's a good starting point. We're good. Yeah.
I hear you. In a context, and given his character that at least we know of, the people who have seen him in that context on shows, maybe having read his book or seen lectures that he's given about just kind of what it means to be a stoic, sort of hardworking human being, he seems like he would be right for the job. I hear the reservation too. It's like you're not completely naive to say, you understand that he hasn't been tested as somebody who's demonstrated an interest in being president and then been pushed back on properly. So what is someone like you, Josiah, and I understand also what you're saying, that any of these six candidates reign supreme over any, the two candidates that we have. What does someone like you think about Jessie Ventura compared to someone like Jocko? Someone who is, for different reasons, could be seen as equally fringe if I'm a suspicious person looking into the movement, but at the same time who's had his go in politics and actually won a major election.
Yeah, I would not bet against any candidate like performing or executing the office of president or vice president, whatever sort of role they get assigned, executing that role with integrity and excellence. I think every candidate would do that in a historic way. I think my main reservations are electability, and my reservations about Jessie Ventura. I loved seeing him in the Campfire interview. He was just like, it was a delightful experience to watch him. I wanted him as like a grandfather or a mentor, like somebody who's not gonna, just gonna push back. Like if he sees something that smells the least bit fishy to him, he's gonna like let you know immediately. And that's charming. It's endearing, and it's like absolutely necessary. I have a hard time imagining him, being attractive to the vast, the vast disaffected center. Or at least the center that's on the fence. If I'm wrong about that, I would get all the way behind him. I just don't. Yeah, he seems he's not one. He doesn't have a very politic bedside manner, let's say, and that's really my main reservation. I don't see that as a flaw in him, as in his capacity to execute as in office, but I do see that as a con with respect to electability.
It's impossible not to hit this crossroads. We're talking now about the difference between bona fides in terms of ideas, temperament, whatever, and being saleable. And we've hit that every time. We are sort of allowing ourselves to be a little bit like dreamers about who would be great if only it were possible, who would be an amazing candidate and why not. And at the same time, we have to think about who is actually going to be able to execute with all the pressures that be and be honest about that. Richard, I'm going to ask you a question before you launch into anything you want to say about Ventura or Jocko Willink. I plead complete ignorance. I don't really know who would be the center left or the center right between Jocko or Ventura. I mean, I don't know where I would place those people.
It's an interesting one, and so admittedly, I did not know much about Jocko until very recently. So what I made sure to do leading up to this was watch some of his podcasts, watch some of his trailers, and get to know his personality. And I want to echo what Josiah said about that whole Teddy Roosevelt vibe. That was kind of what I got too. Speak softly and carry a big stick. That was like the main thing pointing out to me watching all of his videos. It's tough to say, and I think that's part of what would make them an interesting combination. Is the fact that both of them would be hard to peg down. There's ways that Ventura, folks on the right would say, okay, he has to be a lefty because he says we need a Green New Deal. But if you look into the specifics of how he wants to do it, his main thing is repurposing the military budget, right? That's the main policy that I've heard recently, which I think is a smart idea. It's take the military budget, whatever the hell Congress is going to give you, because it's going to be fat, and then just use that money, purchase machines to go dredge the oceans of all the plastic that we've been putting there for the past 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Considering we've got like masses twice the size of like Texas just sitting in the Pacific Ocean. So put the budget to good use. And it kind of, thinking about it strategically, puts his opposition in a bind. Either they cut the military budget, Ventura gets to spin, hey, look, I got them to cut the military budget, which is something folks popularly have been asking for a long time. Why the hell are we in all these wars? But then they piss off their own donors, Congress does, right? Or they go through with the military budget as is, and Ventura, as a third-party candidate, independent candidate, would get to say, hey, I'm finally getting Congress to act on global warming. So it's kind of thinking about the way that PR could play out from those sort of things is very interesting. And yeah, that's more of a thought experiment. But that's kind of a way that I could see folks saying maybe he slants left. But then you talk to lefties and you hear about his old record on taxation and how some of that has honestly changed now. He was for getting rid of the income tax. I don't know exactly what his current policy is on that, but he has mentioned toying around with heightened tax rates for folks over certain income brackets, kind of Eisenhower style, which is something that would interesting to say that Eisenhower was a Republican at one point, but would probably turn off a lot of Republicans today, sure. Which shows you how things have changed. But yeah, it's something to think about. For sure. I'm very curious about military willingness to use the military. I think that might be the metric to use to determine who would be left and who would be right on a ticket like that. Because I know that Ventura is decidedly anti-imperialist, anti-intervention. Both have a military background from different parts of the SEALs. Actually, Jocko was also a Buds class graduate. He just also went on beyond doing the demolitions work that Ventura did. So it would be interesting to see what Jocko's perspective is on the international level. I do know folks have sent me clips of him talking about wanting to defend his family, and they say they're concerned that means he might be a warmonger. I would give him the benefit of the doubt that interpersonal politics probably aren't the same as geopolitical politics. and would want to hear it from his mouth first. But that's kind of my general perspective on that.
Thanks for that, Reed. I mean, let's put it this way. Did you vote today in the Unity election?
I had a glitch with my ballot, so I'm waiting on a new link for it.
Oh, right. That's right. I heard that there were issues. But so let's say you did, and if you were prepared to, where did you place Ventura? Is he your center-right or is he your center-left candidate?
I would probably say... So I haven't actually seen the way the ballot looks yet. So we get to rank the candidates on which side too?
I don't know yet either because I haven't signed on.
That's totally fair.
That's immediately my first task to do after this because we're going to end very soon before they're supposed to close. So
yeah, I would say I know a lot of folks are all for like a Gabbard Ventura ticket, and in that case, I would say he would probably be the center right. But I think when paired with someone like Jocko, maybe he would be the left side of the equation. It's just there's a lot of variables in the air, and I mean clearly if he was with someone like Crenshaw, he'd probably be the left, given his like more anti-imperialist views explicitly.
That's interesting. That's an interesting. I was going to say that's something idiosyncratic, but I don't think you could talk about being idiosyncratic with two people. But that's something interesting and unique about this is that whether somebody is right or left is relative to their running mate.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've been able to ever say that before about a vice president or presidential candidate, at least not that I can remember.
Well, what it kind of exposes is that the left-right divide is largely manufactured. Like right. There's some key issues that folks might disagree on in terms of how involved government needs to be. But a lot of the social distinctions are just amplified by media to keep people separate. Because if the working class in general voted in the same direction for folks that benefited them, we wouldn't be seeing handouts to corporations before folks got help during a pandemic, you know? So they really have to sit on these social issues to divide people. And it's very frustrating. I mean, even if you get up to questions of police brutality, folks agree that extrajudicial killing is wrong. A lot of the dispute comes from the context of the protests. And we can hash out that discussion afterwards. It's even with healthcare, folks agree people need help. It's just a question of framing. It's a question of where the funding comes from. And those are all things that we can discuss. But the way that government is set up right now, the initial premise is wrong because they're not operating from the goal of how do we give people healthcare. They're just operating from the goal of how do we benefit our donors. And so that's what's great about like a unity sort of groundswell moment, right? And I want to add a tidbit here, too. There's this really great article I would encourage y'all to read. It's called Where Has the Jessie Ventura Voter Gone? And it actually was a study of the demographic that voted for Ventura in the Minnesota election and the circumstances. And the Democratic and Republican nominees were the most unpopular candidates for those parties in the history of Minnesota at that time. And most of the folks that he brought in were traditional non-voters. So we're talking college age and above who've never voted before or consider themselves independent, not third party. Third party folks still voted third party. He drew in a new demographic of people because he was able to go to rallies. Folks showed up. They wanted to vote for a wrestler who was a straight talker. They thought that was sweet. And I mean, he likes to say Trump took a lot of that style. Yeah. And Sanders kind of did too, holding all the rallies. Mm-hmm. It's not something that a lot of other politicians do. They'd rather rally with their donors than with the people. It's smart, and it'd be interesting to see how that pans out in a COVID environment. We need folks who can go viral fast. So folks who already have some measure of exposure. And I think that's where his reputation can help in that regard. Just saying he would test the waters. They wrote tons of articles about it in April, which is crazy.
You mentioned a few very interesting things that'll be a good segue here because first you're talking about how we're sold something false with what it means to be on the left, what it means to be on the right, especially in a presidential ticket. And but at the same time, we're talking about Ventura and how he might scale fast. Yeah. Josiah has reason to wonder if he could. I mean, Josiah was honest that, just given his own watching him speak, thinking about him, it's maybe there's something left to be desired about his presentation and how that might look to everybody else. What do you think about that? Could he scale quickly, and could we sell him on the ticket to the American public?
Well, I think part of it is that there's a bit of a divide amongst folks between what they want to see. I think a lot of folks are looking for someone who's more of a straight shooter than someone who's concerned with adhering to like norms of civility, and that's kind of how Trump ends up being propelled the way that he is. He doesn't give a damn about political correctness, and people rave about that. So it's in some ways I push back on the sentiment that we need the flowery rhetoric. We need someone who's willing to get up there and pontificate. We need someone who's willing to get up and point out issues. I don't care whether they're using flowery language or whether they're talking to me straight. I care more that they're willing to speak about truth. And I want to say there's a fair amount of folks who agree. There are certainly people who get turned off by personality, but it would be, I think that's part of where a running mate comes in too. Right? Like Trump always counterbalanced himself with Pence, who appealed more to the like conservative Christian type who are concerned with decorum and that sort of deal. So I think that's one way that you can shore up those concerns. But I also think culturally, just and it's probably more of a generational thing too. Like young folks love to see politicians get called on their shit, and they love politicians who are willing to call out shit. So it's interesting to see that play out.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, just that does seem like a commonality between all candidates, though. Like that's one of the features that they all share is their history of straight talking. I'm not proposing a flowery rhetorical, airy, airy conversation. I think everybody has been nominated has a demonstrated history of straight shooting and clear speaking. And there's, kind of personal aesthetic preference, or like, who you kind of gravitate towards, who you feel good about, like who you're like, oh man, I'd want to be their buddy. But then there's sort of a like general sense of, I don't know. And it's hard to tell how they're going to hit the population on average, how they're going to feel and seem. And I enjoyed Ventura's presentation. I just wasn't, I had some concerns about its viability. I'm probably repeating myself, but.
Well, what you're both talking about is something that I deal with on a regular basis. I think I've mentioned before on this show, but it was when I was guest hosting the first episode that I worked with children, high school age children, and I'm a behavior specialist, and that means dealing with people in a very counterintuitive seeming way. Like if there's a problem or if there's a crisis that comes up, actually I put all of the potential suspicions and problems on the table out loud first so that we can both see them. And that's really disarming, actually. And so we're all agreeing here that not only is it worthwhile for a candidate to do that, like, look, let's just be honest about the problems, even if we don't have a solution for them yet. Let's put them on the table and talk about them. Everyone's sort of a straight shooter who's on the ticket so far. All 6 candidates are people who'd be willing to do that. Maybe I'm not adequately representing either of your positions here. Maybe I'm going off on my own, but I think we could safely say that they're more liable to do that than other candidates. Could you get into a little bit more depth, Josiah, about what a reservation might be with Ventura? In that realm?
Gosh. I wouldn't know how to quite put words to it other than it, again, this is not a personal, opposition to him, or it's not a personal sort of feeling of antipathy towards him. I really enjoy hearing him speak. But there was just there was just like a sharpness to how he replied, and kind of always like, there just was a bit of a sharpness, an edge that I really respected and also had concerns about.
I could see that. That edge could go one way or another in terms of what people's preferences are.
I do I appreciate the point about the fact that Unity 2020, it's not primarily about, we're talking about individuals here, and each individual is going to have there's going to be a partnership between another candidate. And what's going to happen is there's going to be a sort of an emergent character of this team. And so maybe somebody like Ventura is going to be like an emerging collaborative dynamic that would come out of Ventura and Gabbard. It looks totally different than either of them individually, or even sort of where you would imagine they would meet in the middle. There's an emergent third sort of character that happens, and that's a really fascinating prospect. And it's hard to know what that is without testing out these the possibilities. But yeah.
In the interest of time,
Richard,
I'd like to do something for each of you right now. Richard spoke a bit about specific policies, even though I think Richard was talking past tense, that Ventura still holds some of those policy ideas today. Do you have an idea at all, Josiah, about what Jocko's ideas about some policies are, and what, practically speaking, would make him saleable if he were to be a nominee?
Jocko's
and maybe a policy might not be the right way to say it. Maybe I should say, I don't know,
positions or
temperamental preferences or positions.
There has been he has not taken a stance on very many things, policy wise, which is, makes it difficult to try to assess. However, I kind of take issue with the idea that, all politicians, all like presidential campaigns are run on issues. They make campaign promises up front, and then who the hell knows if, there's no accountability mechanism post-election for them to actually like see that through. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Usually they'll say what they have to say to get elected and then cater to their donor base. So I'm not actually very interested in positions. I'm interested in, that's why I'm first a supporter of the Unity 2020 platform, and second, a supporter of any individual ticket. And what I think the Unity 2020 platform does is it provides it's baked in, like discourse and collaboration is baked into the platform. So, even you can elect a president based on a specific position. Even if they, in good faith, try to execute on that position, they are going to, if they don't have the support, like bipartisan support, they're going to have an uphill. It's going to be like pushing water uphill to try to get anything done, which we've seen for the past two presidents. So what I am most interested in seeing is a collaborative dynamic that is at the very top. And when that collaborative dynamic is modeled at the very top, there will hopefully be enough incentive and enough incentive and like support and admiration for that dynamic from the people to incentivize the rest of the establishment to like start developing collaborative a collaborative spirit again. That's, I don't know. I see Jocko performing that role admirably. And I guess that's primarily where I want to stand.
In some ways, I suppose it could be seen as a downside to be holding firmly on to an idea about how to resolve one issue or another if you're not willing to be flexible about it, which, as you say, and as Richard mentioned, there's something appealing about having two people who are running the country in tandem and collaborating frequently and being fluid and flexible. Having said that, Richard, you clearly have some ideas about Ventura, what his ideas are about policies or how he has handled issues in the past. And I'd be interested to hear a few of those if you're up for it.
Definitely. Like I think one of the most interesting things that's come out recently from Ventura has his show on RT, The World According to Jesse. And he had some pretty important pieces outlining the whole defund the police movement and what that actually means. And I think that's some of the most meaningful dialogue around that issue that I've seen, because the way that he communicates it, it crosses the cultural registries within our country, because quite frankly, those of us who live in cities on the coast speak almost a different language from people living in the Midwest, in the South. We have different issues that we're concerned with. So for him explaining what defund the police means, it means when I'm driving down the street and I look over, speaking in his words, kind of paraphrasing, I look over, I see St. Paul, Minnesota police has a giant armored vehicle that looks like a tank. Why the hell do we need that money when we could spend it on social workers to help in those same communities? Or an example I like to pull from is the LA Unified School District PD have grenade launchers. It's extraneous issues like that. A school cop's not going to need a grenade launcher. We're better off funding some social workers rather than getting a tank to the police department. It's things like that. It's not get rid of the cops. And so his ability to kind of explain those issues, and a model that he drew on, he referenced, was Camden, New Jersey. He said did a good job demilitarizing their police, and actually crime rate has gone down. So I would say he'd probably look into examples like Camden and what policies were involved there to shape his response. Now, can I lean on this for just one moment? For sure. But I'm afraid I'll forget it. This is interesting because he's able to lean into this conversation and extract from it its sensibility rather than be averse to it and say, don't gaslight me. Because it's easy to say, all right, you're saying defund the police and abolish the police. And when I say, what the hell are you talking about? No, we can't do that. And then someone comes back at me and says, no. What I really mean is let's fund social workers. You could say, then say that. He doesn't. He skips that step and says, I think I see what you mean. Let's see if this is it. And is able to put it in his terms. And it sounds like sensible terms. I'm not familiar with the research backed on whatever he's talking about, or what you were talking about in Camden, but I'll take you on your word for it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's such an important quality because so much of politics just gets filtered through these partisan lenses, right? We're told if all the blue folks in Congress say yes on something, it's a good idea. And so now we should be mad because the Senate's not passing Pelosi's aid bill. But Pelosi's aid bill had lots of aid, air quotes, directed at programs that didn't necessarily need it right now and still had means-tested aid for people. So it's like that gets lost, all that nuance, because things are so partisan. I mean, there was an article that I read that said that part of the legacy of Jessie Ventura was that he was able to go into a bar with everyday folks just sitting there having beers. He had a beer himself and explained to all of them about why globalized trade and moving all of our factories to China was a problem. That's not the kind of a conversation that you would expect happens in a bar just casually. Just everyday language. Like, we need politicians who are able to do that. Folks are so concerned with forming sentences. We need politicians that can form sentences that are relatable. That's the bigger issue. So he not only takes the lay person's conversation and brings it to the fore of, a national discussion, but he can do the inverse of that. Take what we need to be talking about nationally and bring it to a bar room locally. I think that's fair. Exactly. Since we're on the topic of Ventura, and since we've I'll give people an opportunity to say, add an extra bullet point about the respective candidates. Sorry that I just had to lean over and turn back on my computer there. Let's talk about the Campfire recently. So we've already been discussing it a little bit, but I wonder if there's anything else to add about the conversation that was just had between Bret Weinstein and Jessie Ventura. And again, for people who are unfamiliar, Bret hosts these segments called Campfires as sort of a metaphor for, when people have celebrations that they want or that they want to discuss or problems that they want to solve historically since the beginning of mankind, really, since it's worth remembering. We've been doing that around a campfire at night. So I'd like to discuss what was talked about in that hour and a half segment. And if any of you have keynotes that you want to discuss now and things that you found interesting or things that you found upsetting or any range of things in between. Josiah, maybe I'll turn it back to you since I've been giving Richard so much talking time here.
No, that's fine. I think I probably touched on everything that really struck me. I Ventura made a overall like a positive impression. I think he would be a fantastic, he would be fantastic at the federal level. I'm not sure if he can get there. I'm not sure if we present him as like the face of Unity 2020 or as a face on a ticket, if he could get there. And that's not, I don't really have a whole lot more insight than that. But it was a general approval of him and everything he was saying, and just a caution about going with him at this stage in this Unity 2020 project. But
there's a worthwhile discussion. It sounds like whether it was, if only it was to say, to put Ventura on display one way or another, to say, okay, this is my guy, or okay, I have reservations.
If he's the guy who if he's one part of the ticket, I'll back him all the way for sure.
Richard, keynotes about the Campfire discussion.
Yeah, I know some folks were a little bummed out about how much Jessie stressed the dangers of things like infiltration or the two major parties colluding against you. But I think it's very important to be cognizant of all of that, because by the time Jessie was going into his re-election as governor, he knew that those two parties had already tried to torpedo his chances just by ruining his approved budgets and trying to set him up with a deficit. So it's being aware of those sort of things, how those smears are going to come, being ready both with counter framing of it, but also potentially with executive level solutions to kind of circumvent some of those issues. Right, a president has more authority to do those sort of things than a governor does, although they don't necessarily have control over power of the purse. There's sort of things that they can do around the edges. But I think that's something that's hugely important. Whoever we put forward needs to be very mindful of the opposition from the major parties, and we also need to be careful about folks within the movement. Not to say that you need to be paranoid of everyone who wants to get involved, but to just be cognizant of common techniques that are used to derail things, to get folks focused in the wrong areas or busy arguing on the forums instead of campaigning, things like that.
You said people were bummed about his calling this out. Why do you think?
I saw some folks in the comments saying that, Jessie's being a real cynic about this. And folks kind of echoing it online. That's like, this is just negative talk about the movement when we need to be positive. And I took it more as like a warning signal. At the end of the talk, he said he's all on board with Unity and thinks it's a great idea. He's just given us a warning about what we need to be ready for. That's what he experienced. It's what Perot experienced too. He got death threats even. So, you got to be wary.
Speaking of any cynicism, I'd like to discuss one more topic that I've planned to discuss. Then I'd like to open it up to any last thoughts that either of you have, or if we've missed anything. I'm interested to hear if either of you, and it's okay to play the fifth here, have any thoughts about what has happened on Twitter to us. If I could just remind people, we have thousands of volunteers who've been getting together on Facebook and Twitter and on an app called Slack. And we organized all different styles of communication. And one idea was for people to use Twitter to express their support for Unity 2020, along with this hashtag that was hashtag just say no to Donald and Joe. And some people created a Twitter account just this month, or many on that same day, in order to participate. Ultimately, we got the hashtag trending, and then shortly after that, Twitter flagged us and the hashtag and the associated links as being foul play. And they disabled Unity's main Twitter account. They blocked the links, removed some messages, and with the understanding that I'm being extremely broad, it's possible I'm not even being fair to Twitter or what the goings on really were. I'm eager to hear if either of you have thoughts about this.
Yeah, that was a nutty. I mean, if you're gonna attribute good faith to Twitter, which is probably let's just do that.
And we know everyone wants to.
What it says about our movement is where there's enough people that are well enough organized that it appears that we are automated and robots, and there's that actually seems to like if we as like a grassroots collection of individuals are as coordinated and effective as a host of like Russian bots, like that seems like that's a that speaks highly of our effective capacities.
Yeah.
So I mean that maybe Twitter that was really a concern. It seems like they should have been able to verify that was not the case by now, and open up all those channels again that were closed. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's more flattering to us than it is a really like significant obstacle.
I'll clear a couple things up here too that I just said. I should be more serious. One of our producers, Toby, luckily is here and feeding me this information as we speak. But to firm that up, the Articles of Unity account, the main one, was suspended. I think I said it was disabled. The link to the website was blocked, but now that's back in action as we speak, at least. And what was the last bit? One of the more salient pieces of information is that there are a lot of users that were reporting us as Russian bots. So that may feed into some of the reasons behind what was going on. And it looks like the last note is that Bret's brother, Eric, had a conversation with Jack, Twitter CEO, about the link being restored. So I don't know what's come of that. And I don't think Eric has even said what's come of that. But suffice it to say, it's a conversation that I guess he's willing to be having. But sorry, Josiah, not to leave your point too far. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. It's not, we could think of it in terms of we're being defied and something horrible happened to us, or we could think of it in terms of, we've really brought the conversation to the fore, at least enough that we're being noticed enough to be suspended, blocked.
Yeah. And for just like a grassroots organization that has all volunteers at the bottom level, and then all volunteers at like the organizational level, and like the group leads, everything. It's all volunteers. And we were able to coordinate a like trending or an event wherein we trended, and I don't know. That seems to speak to the not just the support the movement has, but the organizational capacity that non-paid volunteers, grassroots effort is having. Yeah. So.
All right, Richard, key thoughts about what happened on Twitter the other night?
Well, I think Josiah makes an important point. They like to do this thing with Bernie too, and Bernie's supporters. It was you're wasting so much time on social media. But yeah. Also, oh my God, what's with Bernie's army of bros bullying us and affecting the election results? So it's you can either have it one way or the other. I think it's pretty clear social media has an influence on elections. That being said, while it is exciting to see that we've gotten the attention of the powers that be, it points out just kind of how low that they're willing to go. There was a woman the other day who she's been actively opposing Kamala Harris on Twitter. And so some Kamala Harris supporters doxed her for her address and then called up the local Child Protective Services office and filed bogus abuse claims against her so that they had to investigate her and her daughter's relationship. Right. It's awful stuff like that that's down the pipeline of the folks who mass report movements like this. I'm willing to bet it's the same folks. And what they do is they'll report you for being a Russian bot. I think they'll also probably say, but Yang has endorsed Biden and Tulsi endorsed Biden, so their movement is disinformation. And they just skip over the part that this is a draft movement. But Twitter doesn't care about that nuance. They just need the excuse to hit the button. And a lot of this is automated too. So it just takes a certain number of reports to happen. And so it sucks, especially that like the main account got suspended for the movement right as voting is taking place. Like everyone has more than a right to be pissed off about that. It's insane. It's cool to see that we're scary that way, but it's also blatantly undemocratic and disappointing to see a so-called free platform do stuff like that. But social media is controlled at this point. We all know that.
We have to do something on social media and we have to utilize the power of social media, it's very difficult to do something on social media that's going to scale in a short amount of time without being flagged. And it's very difficult to parse whether something is happening in bad faith via Twitter and heads of Twitter. It's difficult to tell whether it's happening algorithmically, and then just like you were mentioning with people being doxxed and reported, you have to investigate it and catch up with it, and maybe they just don't have the tools at their disposal to be able to do it in a, in the time frame that would be reasonable for anybody. I should mention before I go on to this last thing, another thing that I'm glad that Toby is bringing up to me right now. We have the Articles of Unity YouTube page has videos with volunteers showing signs that say, "I'm not a bot" on it, which I thought was effective, genius, and hilarious. But I should ask both of you right now, Richard, Josiah, are you Russian bots?
No, sir.
Okay.
The
silence scared me for a second.
I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure I'm not. I don't speak any Russian.
There were people did accuse me. I'm not very active on Twitter. I use it now and then. But for my part, I do have, it's my own picture, my own name, and links to my own work. So I did think it was interesting when people accused me of being a bot, and you can, link to videos of me speaking from the Twitter account. You didn't have to do too much digging. Do either of you, we did a romp through potential candidates, Bret's Campfire, what happened on Twitter, sort of broad conversations about what the movement's about, and maybe how, there's some specifics I was trying to get into, which both of you reminded me it's not necessarily so much about those specifics or certain policies. Maybe it's more about the what this movement means and what kinds of ideas it brings about, collaboration, flexibility, people who are fit to lead. Have I left anything out that you think is salient and people should be listening to or know about or be thinking about as we enter the week where we're going to be finding out, who are our nominees?
For my part, like I've said, I'm relatively agnostic as to who the nominees are. The idea behind the platform, the philosophy behind the platform is sorely needed. And with that the platform of collaboration between president and vice president across party lines, there are not, that's the best possible situation to be in to answer any question, to address any policy, any issue. We're not going to do any better than that. If your guy, your team, is holds the position you want to see, like reified in public life, fine. But there's going to be an event tomorrow. There's going to be something that transpires, and we're going to need to address a continually unfolding and changing reality. We can't just have this like static stance on issues. We need to have an adaptive leadership that can like move forward into an uncertain, like frankly terrifying future, and do so with competence and confidence and like nonpartisan dealings. And I am 100% behind electing a process into office that is going to handle unfolding situations elegantly. Then I'm regardless of what specific position a candidate may hold or not hold, that's not unimportant. And I imagine a lot of people are going to find that more important. And that's a side of the conversation that I think needs to be had as well. But like, for my part, like, this is the thing that I'm just focused on. This is why I am 100% behind Unity 2020. It's because I want to see this process elected into office. And that's, I'm going to follow it all the way.
We're electing a process and two real human beings who are willing to operate within that process.
Yes.
Richard, any add-ons there?
I think that pretty much covers it. My one bit of advice for folks would be, even though we don't know the exact plan that Bret has outlined for ballot access, start looking up the contact info for your local elections office or your Secretary of State, and be ready to start sending some emails. Because we've tried to get pledged electors for Ventura to draft him, And it is a field day getting in touch with the Secretary of State's office, getting the right forms. They'll try and send you the wrong forms if you used just the wrong phrasing. So just being aware of that stuff and being ready, because the likelihood is we're going to need folks to either sign petitions or sign elector forms to get our candidate ballot access, because 50 states worth of lawsuits is too expensive and too time consuming. So be ready to step up would be my main thing. If you want this to happen, we're going to need folks to sign some paperwork pretty soon. But we can probably do that.
With that, if both of you could stick around for 1 second, I have just some notes that I've put together. They're just in bullet point kind of form, but things I've been looking at. I went around before having this conversation, knowing that we'd be talking about some of these topics and seeing what people's points of view are, questions they might have. And this is actually a direct message to Bret that I would like to give. We had talked about, this is a podcast that's supposed to aid in the conversations that Bret's already having. And so it's our job to kind of give the reflections and reach some sort of an audience. But Bret, I do want to say this. These are my own reflections, certainly my own wording. I think it also represents a lot of the questions and curiosity, suspicions that are being brought up from other interested citizens who are learning about your movement. First, it's kind of obvious that if Twitter were in perfect working order, then some of the nonsense that happened to us last night would have never happened in the first place. That's kind of what Richard was saying. And on the other hand, it's such a novel thing that we did to create a movement so late in the game, tons of brand new accounts, something that it's directly related to politics, and it has to do with these elections. Twitter already has to account for bogus Russian accounts in the 2016 election, and it does seem to have whatever algorithm, that's what it is, set up to deal with these issues that are picked up on whatever we were doing as remarkably similar behavior. And I suppose my question is this, and even if it is inappropriate, that we would be blocked from pushing back on a two-party system and trying to start anew, can we really be surprised that something like this occurred? And it seems like Twitter's own algorithms simply aren't up to date with your or our new way of thinking about politics and how we deliver that message. So more importantly, Bret, what do you suggest we do about this moving forward? And how can we avoid something like this happening again? How can we demonstrate that we are indeed real people, perhaps adding on to what we've already done on the YouTube page, and real people who want to have real and meaningful conversations about how to save our republic? That's note number one. And lastly, Bret, still a direct message to you. For your part, you've really created something interesting and special. This movement covers most bases, including a fail-safe, so that people can feel confident that we're not just a spoiler campaign. And at the same time, I'm trying to think logically and steelman the argument of the most, intense opposition. And we just know that people are going to be suspicious. So I enjoy your work enough and trust you enough to have read between the lines and followed your premise to this logical conclusion. But I think it'd be foolish to expect that others are going to follow suit to scale. So my recommendation here is that we start being above board and proactively responding to all potential suspicions about the movement up front, so that we can, at the same time as people are learning about the movement, that they're also seen as shown of good faith, that we've already taken the most common concerns about such a movement into consideration, sort of like what Richard was talking about Ventura doing, which people were bummed out about. So Bret, I'd love to hear you address these points at some point in full, perhaps on your show or perhaps on this one. And that's an open invitation for a conversation, Dr. Weinstein. You're on Unity Now. So that's it from me. I just want to say thank you to both our participants today, Josiah and Richard. Really cool to just be talking to people and this line of communication with thousands of participants, people volunteering and seeing new faces all the time. For my part, I think it was a brilliantly constructive conversation. And I think that if I was a person coming in trying to figure out what the hell this movement was all about, I would have a better idea of what we're doing with our practice of nominating candidates here. So thank you both again for participating.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah,
Everybody,
thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for your work.
Thank you. So folks, make sure that you tune in for next time. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, Join us again very soon on Unity Now.